I wanted to, one of our topics this week is troubleshooting. In the troubleshooting. There we go. Troubleshooting means what? Determining a problem and correcting it. And so there's a kind of a general structure to troubleshooting, and it's more or less common sense in a lot of ways, but maybe not always. I want to talk a little bit about troubleshooting. There's a procedure you go through. Now, part of this course and part of the A+ certification deals with general principles of troubleshooting. Of course, there's many. A lot of times people think that people who are technicians who take care of things like computers and networks have to be know-it-alls, people that know everything. That's simply not true. What they need to be are people that are good at eliminating what's not wrong. And the other skill that is a big part of it is being a good detective, a researcher. As you learn as you go. So nobody expects. Now, of course, there's a certain knowledge base that, like the A+ certification includes in its, and there's a lot of things that are common knowledge, but it's such a huge field that nobody knows everything about everything. So, of course, that's not anybody can be expected to know everything. So part of the process here is a process of learning as well. But there is a logical progression to determining the source of a problem and correcting it, called a troubleshooting process. And basically there's 5 steps. You determine the major area at fault, determine what action occurred just prior to the problem, write down anything that you might change before you change it so you can reverse it in case it doesn't work. Take your time and think as you're going. So first elaborate on each of these. There are 3 major parts of a computer system or network system or any kind of system actually that involves. There's possibilities for hardware to malfunction, fail. There's possible for software to malfunction. And there's possibility of the user creating the problems. So you have to think about what it is that might be the problem. Is it one of these 3 things? Of the 3, the first one is actually the least likely to occur. A lot of people think, oh yeah, when you service computers, you're typically doing something to the hardware, the electronics, or the electromechanical parts of the computer. And that's not usually the case at all. Usually the hardware is the least likely to fail. The most likely actually is the user not knowing what they're doing or doing something wrong. The second most is the software. Maybe, and then the hardware. So you have to think about what it is possibility. So users are often a source. So part of our job as a computer professional is to help people learn how to use the facilities that they're given, the computers, the software, networks, things like that. I showed you last time that little skit with the computer guy, Nick Burns, a computer guy. he was a terrible teacher. He didn't want to take the time to show people how to fix their problems. They just wanted to be, fix it, and he was rather arrogant about it, of course. Yeah, he didn't want to take the time to, to show them how to do it better, to fix their misunderstandings. Next thing you need to think about when you're troubleshooting is what might have happened just before whatever occurred, whatever the failure was. What was there something changed in the hardware, or was there some new software installed? Did the person using the computer change any settings on the computer? Maybe, we have to always consider the possibility that there was accidentally a virus or some other malware installed on the computer from an email or downloads or something like that. So things that might have happened just before, that's where the little detective work comes in. I think you have to ask, inquire. Maybe the user maybe doesn't know, but at least it's worth asking them to see if they can think of what might have caused it, or what could have been what was the occurrence that happened just before it failed. If you make any changes on a computer, it's important to keep track of that. What can happen is you can make the problem worse by changing things, and usually you change one thing at a time, and then you want to reverse that thing if it doesn't have the effect that you think it might. You don't want to make more than one change at a time, and you don't want to lose track of what those changes are. So it's a good idea to make a note of them. Yeah, you can really make a bigger mess if you're not careful. And of course, just taking your time and not being hasty about it. At the time when you're in a big hurry is when things will go worse, because usually those kind of things are not something you can rush. Of course, there are times when things are, in a crisis, and you have to try to work as hard as you can, as fast as you can, but you can't always do that. And then, of course, think about what are the possibilities. What is not the problem? What is there that isn't wrong? You can eliminate things that way. Computers are complicated machines, and yet they're built of systems and subsystems. And they are quite logical in the way that they're put together, and they have these subsystems that you can isolate. You can actually service a computer fairly easily because it helps you in a lot of ways. It has built-in troubleshooting. For example, we haven't got into it in great detail, but the basic input-output system, or the EUFI, as it's called nowadays, has built-in diagnostics. It checks a lot of systems in your computer, and you can find out a lot of things about your computer when you start it up because it has this built-in diagnostics. That can help you to eliminate what's not the problem. And of course, when you see the symptoms that you recognize, more than likely someone else has had the same symptoms. So somebody else will have this experience. And the internet and search engines and things are your friend. You can often find someone else who's had the same exact problem and has documented it in some way. Of course, that's kind of a hit and miss thing. A lot of times I've encountered problems, and somebody will make this suggestion or that, and it doesn't work. But you have to maybe do several, try different ones. The first one you find may not be correct, so you have to a little bit of trial and error is involved in the troubleshooting process. when it comes to trying out solutions that other people have suggested. But let's look at some just real common problems. Here's a very common problem that occurs with computers, especially with computers running Windows. It's called the blue screen error, and this is a message that indicates that something bad has happened and there has been a memory fault. What can happen, usually the operating system tries to keep different programs from interfering with each other. They each have their own memory space. And one of the reasons why we have so much memory in our computers nowadays is that we often run many different programs simultaneously. Not all of them are, using as much of the processor as the others. Some of them only use a little bit of power, a little bit of the processor's time. Other ones keep it more busy. But there's a lot of programs running there, and each of those programs has its own memory space. It's divided up. And those memory spaces have to be respected. If one program tries to get into another program's memory space, it can cause a problem. But there's special hardware in the processor that prevents that from happening. So if that kind of an error occurs, that's what usually causes the blue screen. It could be due to a hardware problem. It could be due to a memory fault. That would be one thing that one would want to check if you see one of these kinds of errors. There is some information that's given in the blue screen error. It does indicate there's some information about the fault. It'll typically have a memory location address on it that may or may not be useful. So these kinds of errors can be intermittent, meaning they don't always occur reliably, and fortunately they're rather rare. Blue screen errors used to be more common years ago, but you still see them once in a while. They can happen to any computer, and sometimes they can be quite random. They might even be something that might occur just one time, and then you won't see them again. There are sometimes errors that occur in a memory. Not very often, but if you just lose one single bit somewhere in the billions of bits that you have in your computer, it can cause a fault. Just one single bit changes the number stored in one of those bytes, and that could be an instruction code for a program, for example. It could change the instruction, and then the program suddenly changes, and it misbehaves, does something totally unexpected. And that can be due to all kinds of things. It could be due to a bit of cosmic rays coming through your memory chip from outer space. It could be due to an electrical surge. There's all kinds of possibilities. And that will cause a malfunction. But fortunately, that doesn't happen that often, so it's a good thing. They've figured out ways to make memory more reliable over the years. You can have other causes of blue screen errors. You can have, again, memory. You can have video problems. The video system could be a problem because it has memory as well. The video system uses memory, or it has its own memory. There might be something set wrong in the computer setup, the BIOS or UEFI, that says beyond the capabilities of the hardware. What that might mean is, for example, a lot of BIOS settings, a lot of BIOS and UEFIs have the ability to change the speed of the processor. You can upgrade the speed, make it go faster, but that can sometimes be at the expense of reliability. So you might find that It's going too fast. It needs, or it's not getting cooled enough. It's getting too hot. If a processor gets hot, too hot, it will cause sometimes blue screen errors. There may just be a bug in some program somewhere that causes a major fault. Software has some bad code in it. Or it could be something wrong with the operating system. Operating systems, such as Windows, have bugs in them. They're constantly finding bugs and correcting them. And you know, some of them are very rare bugs. They don't occur very often. And they're fixed as they find them. Or it could be just a certain combination of the operating system and some certain hardware. You can find that there's a code in the blue screen, and that you can search the Microsoft because Windows generates these messages. Sometimes you can find out what that code might mean, or if it is of any use. It may or may not be. Another common source of problems on computers is when the computer starts up. And when the computer first starts up, you often find that the problem will occur. And in fact, a lot of the problems occur like this. Maybe the computer is just dead. Maybe nothing happens at all. You don't see anything. Or maybe there's lights on the computer, but nothing seems to be happening. No activity. Or maybe the computer beeps and then doesn't display anything on the screen. There's a built-in beeping codes that you can use for finding problems. Maybe the BIOS system, basic input-output system, puts an error up on the screen. Maybe the hard drive isn't connected or turned on properly. It doesn't have any activity. Or maybe the computer just starts up, tries to start up, but then immediately crashes or reboots again. Doesn't succeed at booting up. Well, why would a PC be dead? The first one is probably a power problem a lot of times. So one of the first things, of course, you check is make sure it's plugged in. That's a simple thing. It could just be the power cord isn't plugged in on one end or the other. And of course, make sure that there's power available. The power supply can be easily tested. We have power supply testers and multimeters that we can use for that. So that could be a source of problem, the power supply. Again, that's when you have a computer that doesn't do anything at all. No lights, nothing. But sometimes you find that you'll turn a computer on and it will have some lights. So that would indicate that at least you're getting electricity into the computer. The power supply may be working, okay. But maybe the power supply isn't turning giving the motherboard the proper voltages. There's a signal that comes from the power supply to the motherboard called the power good signal. It's a wire. And that wire turns on when the power supply determines that all of its voltages are correct. That's so that the motherboard won't try to operate with incorrect voltages. So you can check that with a multimeter. You can check to see if that wire has, it'll have 5 volts on it when it's good, when the power's good. If it stays at 0 volts, then that would indicate that the power supply is not able to put out the right voltages for some reason. Maybe the power supply is bad, or maybe there's something wrong with the motherboard and it's causing the power supply to be unable to produce the correct voltages. Maybe there's a short circuit. In other words, something's drawing too much current. Of course, the connectors may be a problem. You always want to check connectors, make sure they're plugged in correctly and pushed in all the way. Even the CPU sometimes can get knocked out of its socket or not be put in correctly. Maybe it was put in and it worked for a while, but it stopped. because it wasn't installed correctly. That can happen, and that would cause a fault. Or there just may be something wrong with the motherboard. Motherboard may have a problem with might not determine exactly what the problem is. It may just be a defective motherboard. Motherboards are considered to be field replaceable devices, meaning that you can replace, try to repair a motherboard, but more often than not, you replace it or upgrade it. What if there's no video? If there's no video at all, the computer has a buzzer inside of it, a piezo beeper, they call it, and it can make sounds. So if you get beeping sounds, that might indicate that it knows that it can't display the video correctly. And that might be something to do with video system, if it's built into the motherboard, or it might be a video card that's plugged into an expansion slot. Not functioning correctly. So you can find out what that code is, and it'll help you troubleshoot it. It could be the monitor is a problem too. Maybe you have no video because the monitor's not connected correctly, or it's not powering on. Another thing that can show up when you start up your computer is setup errors. This is the BIOS, the basic input-output system. That is the built-in program in the motherboard that starts up when you turn on your computer. And there's they refer to it as the CMOS. The CMOS it's kind of a term that just comes from the past. They used to use a chip called the CMOS chip to store the settings for your computer, for the BIOS settings. And that they don't use CMOS chips for that anymore. They use flash memory now. But it was a memory chip. CMOS stands for complementary metal oxide semiconductor. A CMOS memory needs a battery to not forget what's stored in it. And so older computers would use a little battery to keep that going. Now we still have batteries on the motherboards, but they aren't used for that anymore. They're used for the clock, to keep the clock date and time going. So it's possible the settings are wrong, and it'll tell you that. And we've seen that happen already in some of our computers. We've turned them on, and maybe it'll tell you that there's no hard drive, no optical drive or something that's missing. Well, maybe that's because it's turned on in the BIOS, but there is no device hooked up. Maybe the cable maybe it's in there, it's inside the computer, but it hasn't been plugged in. So you have to be sure that so you can go into the setup and you can look and see what's supposed to be turned on and identify if anything is turned on that shouldn't be, or if something is turned off that should be turned off. Another thing you can do is you can do alternative boot up. You can instead of booting off the hard drive, you can boot off of a flash drive or a CD or DVD, or even a floppy disk if your computer has one of those. And you can start up the computer using an alternative operating system and check systems. I can let you know if help you diagnose trouble. So, and eliminate whether it might be something wrong with the operating system. So those are all startup problems. Now, a lot of problems occur during startup. So that's a good time to be aware of watching your computer when you start it up. Watch it very carefully to see what happens. Sometimes the computer, when it's starting up, it will crash. In other words, it'll just suddenly stop doing what it's supposed to be doing, and you get some kind of error, or maybe the computer will just reboot. And that could be due to like a power problem. You know, maybe the power supply is working too hard and it can't supply enough power. This is where it's a good thing to know, to be able to identify what's happened recently to the computer. Has there been something new added to the computer? Have we added some new hardware, such as a video card, for example? Those use a lot of power. Maybe you got a better video card for the computer, you installed it, and then all of a sudden it doesn't run reliably anymore. Well, maybe that video card uses too much power for the power supply. You might need a better power supply, power supply that has a higher wattage rating. Another thing that would cause crashes or rebooting after running for a while is heat. If the computer is having trouble with not being cool enough, so maybe it needs some servicing. That maybe there's a paste that you put on top of the CPU that connects it to the heat sink that takes the heat away, right? And that paste may have dried out. This doesn't make good at thermal contact. Another thing is that could cause intermittent things is maybe this memory or the CPU, which again isn't seated correctly, and it's making poor contact. I've seen a number of times where a computer will run for a while and then wake up, and you know, it seems like it was okay, and then all of a sudden crashed. And you open it up and you find out one of the memory modules is just it isn't pushed in all the way. It's just touching, you know, it's barely touching, and then a little vibration or something knocks it loose, and then it doesn't make good contact. So they have little clips there's clips on the side of the memory that you have to be sure they're snapped into place. Also, of course, there could be problems with the motherboard. It could be a faulty motherboard, which may need to be replaced. You know, if you try checking the memory and the CPU, those kind of things, they all seem to be installed correctly. It's possible. That would be, of course, the last thing you want to try. You want to try other things first. You won't have to replace the motherboard unless you have to. It could also be problems with the operating system being corrupted. And the operating system could have bad files in it. They have files that have been damaged somehow. Maybe during an update from Microsoft, you know, Windows updates itself every so often. Sometimes the update doesn't work right. Also, malicious software, viruses and things of that sort could cause sudden crashes. So we want to do a virus scan. We'll have one of our later topics is malware, you know, viruses, things like that. Another possibility is some kind of problem with the hard drive. The hard drive is a mechanical device in some cases, or it could be a flash type hard drive. In either case, if it's a mechanical drive, it might make strange sounds, clicking sounds, or things that are not normal. So hard drives can fail. Hard drives do wear out. They have a limited life. Yes, sir.
So,
okay.
I just want to know if your hard drive becomes damaged, is there any way to recover your data from the hard drive? If it will load up on your operating system manual?
The question is, if your hard drive is damaged, is there any way to recover the data? Yes, there are people who specialize in doing that. If the hard drive is mechanical, you know, if it has a mechanical failure, but the disks are still intact, the data is still stored on them, there are people who will take the hard drive apart in a very clean room and put it back together with new parts and then get your data out. It's very expensive, but it's definitely an option if it's, you know, it's very important data. They have people to do that for a living. And there's also some tools, you know, if the hard drive isn't completely, which is partly working, there are some software tools that can help you to try to recover the data by repeatedly trying reads. Sometimes it might read it, sometimes not others. It's intermittent. But yeah, you can. It's possible to recover data from hard drives. There are people that do that for a living. I suppose, you know, if you might find that to be by the way, that's a type of, that's a service that computer technicians offer that learn that specialty skill. It doesn't take a huge amount of equipment to do it, but there's some specialized equipment that you use. Yeah.
Is it normal for it to blow up? Not blow up, literally, but inflate, I guess I could say.
Inflate?
Yeah, it actually became like a bubble. Now,
Is that a hard drive?
It's a portable hard drive that I used to have, and then all of a sudden it crashed. I couldn't get into it no more. Every time I plug it in, the light comes on, and no access.
But it got thicker?
So this started like inflating, kind of like you feel the heat, and then you can feel the metal kind of fill up.
Oh,
So
it's the battery inside. Sometimes the lithium-ion batteries or lithium batteries will inflate. They'll get fat. Yeah, they fail. Sometimes they will blow up with gas inside. Not explode necessarily, although they have been known to do that too.
It just fills up and then kind of heats up.
Oh.
And then that was the other question is, can you...
Well, if that is the case, if it's just your battery that's the problem, you could probably take it apart, take the battery out, find a new battery for it. That's definitely a possibility. And then you can you could get another one that's just like it and take your hard drive out of that one, because there's a hard drive in there that's separate. You could take that hard drive out and put it in another unit, and another one identical to it if you could find one that's the same. Yeah, it's definitely worth the try, especially if you got important stuff on there. So yeah, hard drives definitely can crash and burn, right? Of course, sometimes they can't be recovered either. That happens too, and that's sad when people lose their, like nowadays, one of the things that people lose a lot is their pictures, right, from their cameras, or they have hundreds and hundreds of pictures or movies they've taken with their camera, their cell phone, or whatever, and they just store it on a hard drive and they lose it. Of course, the prevention for this is backing things up, storing it in 2 different places, making a copy of it. One of the things that can fail on a hard drive is the master boot record. If that happens, you lose your data. You lose track of where the data is stored. The master boot record stores where information is on the hard drive, where all the files are. So that's an important part of the computer. It also has information for booting the computer up when you first start up. When the operating system is to be loaded, when you first start up your computer, the way that happens is the BIOS, after the BIOS has done the self-check, power on self-test, it will then look to a certain place on the hard drive, which is part of this master boot record, and will load it into the computer's memory and then run the program that's installed inside of that master boot record. And it will run it. That program then goes ahead and starts loading the operating system. So if that gets damaged somehow, then that process won't happen. There's a program called FDisk, that you can use as a way to check the master boot record and see if it's correct or not, and also change it if you need to. But you have to be careful with master FDisk. You can also destroy things too. So don't, because you're changing the actual. It's like the directory for the hard drive. It's everything stored in. It's where it's everything, not the data itself, but where it's located. If you lose track of it, then it's just as well you might have lost it. Now it's possible to reconstruct that using some special software that can find things and reassemble them and find some of the files that might have been lost.
If we lose something, if we lose something, we can go back to here to look for.
Well,
say it's the master boot record.
yeah, because because a lot of times the data, the actual files are still there. It's just where they're located may have been lost. And so by using special software, you can reconstruct the file structure and rebuild it sometimes.
Is there any way to read it without knowing the location that's posted all of it?
Well, if the master boot record lost that information, that's the problem. Is where is it? You know, the data is stored somewhere on the hard drive, but where is it? What file is what? That's the problem. The way that one of the ways that this is prevented is to have 2 copies of the master boot record. And that's so that you have a backup in case one gets damaged. Another thing that can cause faults is just anytime that something is changed on a computer. If we upgrade something or change something inside the computer, that could be a time when something may not work correctly. So we want to think about, has there been a change, especially an upgrade of hardware, any kind of new things added to it. Because when you do that, you might find that there's some problem with compatibility. Maybe the hardware you have doesn't have the right driver installed, or you need to get a driver for it. Or maybe it just isn't compatible with that particular motherboard. It might be that it uses, that would be kind of rare, but you could have, for example, there's different versions of the older computers, mainly the PCI bus, they called it. There were different versions. You could have different hardware that simply doesn't work with that particular version because it has a different voltage. There used to be 3 volt and 5 volt. Nowadays though, with our with the PCI Express that we don't have that problem so much because they got rid of that. It's having 2 different voltages. It's an older hangout, a thing that they eliminated. All right. So that was troubleshooting process. There's one other thing I wanted to show you that can cause problems. Dust, right? You can get dust in your computer. Some of our computers that we have in our lockers, we had a lot of dust in them, so we had to clean them out. That's a pretty extreme example there. The dust causes heat to build up and interferes with the fans and things like that. So just keeping your computer clean helps it run better. Just like any kind of machine, you want to keep the dust out of it. Too much dust definitely will make trouble. All right, well, that's a little overview of troubleshooting. And we'll go into more detail on a lot of these different areas what we're going to start now. The next part is going into the hardware, different parts of the computer and different systems in the computer, and see how these different parts function and how we can troubleshoot them and so forth. So section 3 is a big chapter. Chapters 3 is a big chapter, has lots of sections in it, and we'll spend a lot of time there learning about different parts of the computer, different hardware. Starting out with the cases and form factors, what the different shapes computer cases have, and the motherboards, how the motherboards are shaped. and how they connect. There's standards that, so we'll do that next week. All right, I'm going to let you guys here in the classroom have time to work on some projects. You've been installing operating system on your computer, getting it all running. You added a second operating system, or maybe you just want to work on some of your other things like test out activities. If you want to get all up to date, by the end of the week, we'd like to get up to section 2.5 so that we can start chapter 3 next year. 2.5 is the troubleshooting process.
When are you going to put the 3.0 up and running on ours?
I'll do that now. I'll go ahead and turn.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and make the. Well, you can go ahead and the question was can I go ahead and test out
in Canvas, but we can jump in and test out and start running it.
Yeah, you can. Even if I don't have it linked up on the Canvas yet, you can go ahead and do it in test out if you want to get ahead. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's just that when you come back later, you will go to the, like here. What I'm talking about is if I go to one of these here, let's say I didn't have it on the Canvas yet. You can come back, you can go ahead and do it and then come back later, and then when you click on it, it will have the submit score button, and you don't have to do it over again. You just have to click the submit score button.
Just a lab, you have to do it over again.
Oh, that could be it. Yeah, you might want to.
Just a lab. The test you don't have to do the lab.
As long as the score is there, it'll have to. If it has the score, then you don't have to do that over again.
It says 0, don't turn in 0.
All right. Yeah, don't make it 0. And by the way, if you do get a 0, why you can replace it too. You can replace your score by doing it over again. It's not like you can only get one chance. All right. Well, thank you for your attention there, and I'm going to. I recorded this so people can watch later if they want to, if you didn't get to come. So we'll see you later.
Mr. Bond.